Welcome back to Cartels, Conspiracies, and Camarena. I'm Jack Llewellyn. Thank you for joining me. It has been a while since I last talked to you all. Good portion of that was for the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've had a cold / flu / something or other. And in addition to feeling terrible, I sounded horrible. Quite frankly, I sounded worse than Bobby Kennedy for most of that time period. And I knew I didn't want to listen to myself for an hour or so I didn't want to subject you all to that either. As you can tell, I'm still not 100%, but I think I'm better, and I will try to get through today as best I can and hope that we have no coughing fits. So today I want to talk about 3 things. One is I have an announcement about some of my website materials. Number 2 is I want to talk about some news events in the last couple of weeks since the last time we talked. And then 3, I want to talk about plea agreements and plea bargaining, specifically with respect to a couple of the more notable cartel figures that are in U.S. custody right now. All right. First, announcements. Some of you may know that my website had been located at www.jacklewellen.com. That has now moved to a new URL, cartels, conspiracies, and camarena.com. It's a little bit longer, but it's going to serve a purpose. So everything has been moved over there. There may be some functionality issues as we continue to move things over, as we continue to get all the files over. But by and large, that website is up and running. It is going to allow me to expand so that in addition to all the materials, and I've got a heck of a collection of documents and materials regarding the Camarena case, but in addition to that, we're going to start putting in information on cartels and some of the things that we talk about on this podcast. So it'll be far more directly related to what we're doing on the podcast on a day-to-day basis. But that information on the Camarena case is always going to be there, and we will add to it as we go along. And I will talk about that in a future episode. So that's the first thing on websites. The second thing is I'm going to have an author's website up and running in the next couple of weeks. That will be where I'll focus on my books. So my first book, which was Someone Had to Die, which dealt extensively with the Camarena case. My second book comes out in March, and that one is also has some relationship to the Camarena case, but talks extensively about the fentanyl crisis and about the role of American agencies, including but not limited to the Central Intelligence Agency, their role in the fentanyl crisis and how it's developing things. So that book's coming out in a couple of weeks. The website will be out before that. I will shamelessly self-promote it on future episodes, but wanted to let you know it's coming. We're also going to have the availability for signed copies, etc. All right, enough of that. Let's talk about some of the news that's happened over the last couple of weeks, as I say, since we last talked. Not exactly news, but Insight Crime, which has a great website. They do really good work. I really enjoy looking at their stuff. And they focus on South America as well as Mexico. But they ran a series in January on fentanyl, on the production of fentanyl, the distribution of fentanyl, that I thought was extremely well done and very interesting. So if you're interested in that topic, check them out. A major news event over the last month or so that got very little attention, or at least not as much as it deserved in my mind, was the fact that El Chavo Felix, a key player in the Sinaloa cartel, a key player within the Los Mayos faction of the cartel, a close associate of El Maito Flaco. Well, he was arrested by federal forces south of Culiacan in January. I'm tempted to say that this could be a significant blow to the Los Mayos faction of CDS. But you know what? This battle, civil war between Los Chapitos and Los Mayos has played out for several months. There's been several arrests, several events where people said, wow, this is going to be a big deal. This is a game changer vis-a-vis these two factions within the cartel. And yet both are still there. Both are still fighting. So I don't know if it's a major event or if it's going to be a major event. On its face, it would seem that it should be. We may actually talk about El Chavo Felix a little bit more in an upcoming episode, because I think his role and his arrest tell us some things about CDS. They tell us some things about the government and how the government is relating to things. So we may approach it again in a week or two. Some more news. El Chapo had an appeal denied, I believe it was today, by the Second Circuit. Essentially, El Chapo had said that he was entitled to a reversal of his conviction, or at a minimum, a new trial, because his conviction was based largely on false testimony provided primarily by witnesses who had either had reached deals with the government or otherwise had something to gain by testifying incorrectly, he said, against him. Second Circuit gave it very little weight and essentially said there's no new evidence, and certainly not a quantum of new evidence that would warrant a new trial or any other relief sought by El Chapo. I would expect to see more appeals from El Chapo, and I'd expect to see them get about as far as this one did. A couple of other things. As you may have heard, shortly after President Trump was inaugurated on January 20th, he issued an executive order designating some Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations. We've talked about the terrorist organization designation in the past. There is substantial disagreement amongst people that I respect on what effect this will actually have. Proponents believe that it will pave the way for greater cooperation between Mexico and the United States, and also give the U.S. Organizations, law enforcement organizations, better access, better methods to fight the cartels. So we'll see what happens with that. Again, it was shortly after the inauguration on January 20th. I'm not sure if it was that day or the day after. So we're talking far less than a month. I don't want to come to any conclusions regarding the effectiveness of that designation at this time. And then lastly, just in the last 24 hours, we've had some interesting developments. President Trump had threatened Mexico, Canada, and China with a series of tariffs, including 25% tariffs on lots of items coming from Mexico. Those were to take effect today. They've been postponed now for at least 30 days after Presidents Trump and Sheinbaum had a conversation today, and President Sheinbaum pledged to move 10,000 National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexico border to try to slow both illegal immigration and the trafficking of narcotics, primarily fentanyl. We'll talk about that again, or also in a future episode. As I say, let's wait and see a little bit how things play out before we start coming to conclusions. I will note that there was a great deal of speculation when President Sheinbaum was elected as to whether or not she was going to fully adopt the hugs but not guns philosophy of her predecessor. And I happen to be one who thought that she may end up having a slightly different position and taking a slightly different tack. Query whether or not these actions, the arrests of some key players, including El Chavo Felix, reinforce that notion that she's going to have at least somewhat divergent policies from AMLO. Again, time will tell, and we will keep looking at that issue. Okay, now I want to talk about plea bargaining. Why do I want to talk about plea bargaining today? Over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks in particular, seen it before, but man, every other day now, there is something talking about the fact that Ovidio and Joaquin weren't at a hearing, a pretrial hearing, and that reflects that there might be plea bargains going on. We're going to talk about El Mayo, the rumors about El Mayo and a plea bargain. And I want to try to temper some of the hysteria, both in the media and on social media, and these headlines that are a little bit farcical. Why do I say that? Think about this number. According to a recent report from the American Bar Association, in any given year, about 98% of criminal cases in the federal courts end in a plea bargain. I'm going to repeat that. In any given year, 98% of criminal cases in the federal courts end in a plea bargain. Some would argue that that system encourages efficiency and getting rid of cases over fairness and innocence. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But 98%. So when somebody says, oh, Ovidio's in jail, he's probably trying for a plea bargain. Well, the answer is yes, and so is everybody else in federal custody. So let's not get too crazy. The ABA Plea Bargain Task Force said, in part, that trials have become rare legal artifacts in most U.S. jurisdictions and even non-existent in others. In addition to the stark numbers that I just mentioned with respect to federal trials, in Pennsylvania, Texas, and New York, as examples, they all have trial rates. That is, how many cases, criminal cases that get docketed, actually go to trial. Pennsylvania, Texas, and New York have trial rates of less than 3%. Right? So that means that 97% of the cases or more are being plea bargained. And one of the things that we know for a fact, is that some innocent defendants will falsely plead guilty in order to get a plea bargain that is better in their mind than going to trial and losing. Right? Hey, you're facing 25 years. We've seen this on every police procedural in the last 40 years, right? Hey, you're looking at 25 years, but give us some information and, you'll get less. Or even just, hey, you know what? And I had done this. I haven't practiced white-collar criminal in quite a while, but this was not uncommon. You're facing 20 years. We'll agree to something that around 10 if you don't make us go to trial. It's better for everybody, right? Happens all the time, and it reinforces the notion of some in the criminal justice system, particularly defendants, that everyone in the system is against them, right? Because the idea isn't to find out who's guilty and who's innocent. It's to process as many people through the system as possible. There is a database by the Innocence Project that lists a number, dozens and dozens of people who were exonerated. Okay? Exonerated. Not, they might not have done it, but exonerated people who falsely pled guilty. Okay? So, when people talk about plea bargains and they're all excited because Ovidio wasn't at a hearing, or because somebody is saying that, there may be a plea bargain by El Mayo, that in and of itself isn't exciting. That's not news. We may be getting to the news in just a second, though. So, last month, El Mayo had a court appearance. And at that court appearance, U.S. prosecutors said in open court, hey, we're discussing a potential deal with El Mayo. Again, nothing unusual, nothing out of the ordinary about that. One of the things that was interesting, though, is he specifically said, the U.S. attorney or assistant U.S. attorney working on the case said, hey, we've been talking. They haven't borne fruit so far, but we want to keep trying. Judge said, okay, I'm going to schedule another hearing in April for an update. One of the other things that happened at that hearing was whether or not El Mayo wanted his attorney, Mr. Perez, to continue representing him, even though he had previously represented his son, Vicente Zambada, who is a potential witness in the case. So talk about conflicts, but El Mayo said, I don't want a different attorney. I want him, even though this could be a conflict if he represents me and my son. Okay, so I told you, don't get too excited, right? Don't get too excited. Everybody's plea bargaining. Yes, the government's trying to work out a plea bargain. Let's see what happens. Well, then we had news over the last week or two that suggests that El Mayo might be providing critical information. Couple of reports recently, like as recent as yesterday or today, have suggested, and some of this language is a little bit flowery, so let's wait and see what it really is. But some have suggested that El Mayo is providing an, quote, encyclopedia, close quote, of information regarding not necessarily the cartel inner workings, but more specifically, the cartel's relationship with the Mexican government, including but not limited to former President AMLO and current governor of Sinaloa, Ruben Roca Moya. Reports suggest, now again, where these reports come from leaves me a little bit suspicious. Doesn't mean they're not right, But until you actually hear it from the government or you see it someplace, leaked information is leaked information. But these seem to suggest that El Mayo is recuperating, right? Since he's been in prison, he's in the United States. He's detoxed from drugs, and he's also received much better health care than he was receiving in Mexico. So the reports are that he's had an improved health, and his memory is damn good, and he's working reverse chronologically, providing information about government, military, and other quasi-governmental organizations and their relationship to the cartels. That, if true, should scare a lot of politicians in Mexico. Query, though, the degree to which that will help him vis-a-vis his own prosecution. So my sense has always been that El Mayo's primary goal at this point has to be to stay out of Supermax, right? If he provides information about Governor Moya or AMLO or, whomever else, those are not necessarily going to be figures that are subject to American jurisdiction, at least not in the short term. And so question the degree to which it really helps the federal prosecutors sufficiently to give a great deal of benefit to El Mayo for those revelations. Okay. This is another one. Let's look at how things play out. Let's look at where things go. But it appears that El Mayo, who we all know knows a lot, may be saying a lot. The other big group or it's two people that are being talked about as far as plea bargains are Ovidio and Joaquin. Right? Ovidio was not at his last court appearance. Again, not dramatic, nothing of note, but prosecutors said they were trying to reach a deal with him, and a new hearing date was scheduled for February 27th. Similarly, they were having conversations with Joaquin as well. Remember, a video was captured, a month or a year or more before Joaquin. So naturally, it would appear that it's going to take a little bit more time to reach a deal if there is one to be reached with Joaquin. Joaquin has a court date in March 19, and we'll learn more information. The procedural posture seems to suggest that prosecutors are more on the precipice with Ovidio and may have to either reach a deal or prepare for trial, and that process is much further along than with Joaquin. One of the things that's interesting is whether or not a plea bargain in in these cases in Illinois could resolve the issues that both Ovidio and Joaquin face in other jurisdictions, including New York. Remember, there was that late indictment in New York right after Ovidio was captured, or relatively close after he was captured, listed a whole new set of charges against Los Chapitos. Query whether or not one of the sticking points in a plea bargain is getting both of those prosecutions resolved at the same time. Then we have another one that may be getting a little bit less attention, but Hernan Domingo. who went under the alias El Mero Mero, who was said to be a key player in the operations of the Sinaloa cartel. He was the uncle of Ovidio Guzman, and he agreed to be extradited to the United States. He had been arrested, but he had agreed to be extradited. He had been arrested in Sinaloa on December 16th, agreed to be extradited, and almost specifically in the extradition, noted that he was willing to cooperate. It is said that El Mero Mero was central to the trafficking of fentanyl. Excuse me. And again, at the time he was arrested, there were people saying, hey, this is going to be a major blow to the fentanyl trafficking from Los Chupitos. And I'm not sure that there's any empirical evidence to support that. But having said that, you have yet another player who is going to offer his information, his knowledge to the U.S. authorities. Remember, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this this pattern that the U.S. has of rewarding people who will turn and testify on other people, testify on bigger fish. And we questioned at that time the propriety of that and really the success of it, whether it has led to convictions that otherwise wouldn't have been found or had, whether it leads to new information that actually supports the war on drugs. We can talk about that again later on. But now, isn't it a little bit interesting? If you have Ovidio, you have Joaquin, you have El Mayo, you have El Mero Mero. We know that there are other people out there, who've been arrested previously with lots of information, La Barbie, El Grande, et cetera, et cetera. At some point, is there going to be enough information to go around? You have to figure El Mayo in particular is going to have information that's valuable no matter what. But we also had, El Vicentillo testify to lots of the things that El Mayo would know. And I wonder if this game, such as it is, of offering information for reduced sentences or for better sentences, and we talked in the last episode about it, that some of them have gotten really good deals, right? How much more is there to tell that's going to be valuable? Who else out there? What other big fish are they looking to get? They've got El Chapo, right? El Mayo's in jail. Who else are people going to turn on that are sufficiently wanted in order to justify some type of a plea bargain that makes sense for both sides? We'll continue to look at that and see if we have any additional information as we go on. Mostly, I just want you to, if you can, when you see these things, that says, hey, Ovidio's not adhering, he must be doing a plea bargain. That's not unusual. It's not stunning. It's only stunning. It's only newsworthy if they actually reach a plea agreement and if something useful is actually provided. And by that I mean the simple fact that a agreement is reached and information is provided does not necessarily mean that it's good or valuable information, or that in somebody's estimation was worth the plea bargain itself. And I'll point back to the Camarena case and the information provided by Jorge Godoy and Rene Lopez Romero that has allowed them to make hundreds of thousands of dollars and live in the United States. And an objective person, in my view, would never say that the information that they provided was sufficient for that, especially when Rene Lopez Romero said that he was one of the people who kidnapped Agent Camarena. Whether that's true or not, and I don't think it is, he at least said that. So we have to keep in mind, you got bad people wanting these plea bargains. The quantum of evidence sufficient to provide benefits to them, whether it's in a reduced sentence or better conditions or whatever it may be, the standard should be pretty darn high. And one of the things that's really hard, I believe, is for anybody on the outside to have enough information to make that evaluation and to hold the prosecution, to a standard, to an ethical standard. All right. Enough of that. You've heard me rant about that before. I'm going to keep this short only because I don't think my voice is going to hold out much longer. I appreciate you following me again, coming back. We will be back in a couple of days. We've got a couple of things coming up. In particular, we have the date of February 7 coming up quickly. February 7, of course, will mark 40 years ago that Agent Camarena was kidnapped outside the American consulate in Guadalajara. We're going to have a special episode about that. And then we will get back to our normal programming and things with respect to cartels and conspiracies and Camarena. So thank you very much. Happy to be back, and I'll talk to you next week.